It's weird. Like, even though we're going to be running the buses in disadvantaged areas, the way that we start is it has to be done. What difference does it make in the debt? You can't give us concepts. So are we sure that we have them at. We basically tried to argue. 2 blocks that way is a different community, and 2 blocks that way is this used to be a before. 2 blocks on that side of the freeway is the disadvantage community. 2 blocks that way is yes. So we agree, but I would stand up and say now Bryce is we still get the 600,000. It's not like jump change. Well, if we don't say anything, then we're going to have Melissa tell us when the price went up, so we have to come back to the board. That's why we did this. If we find out if we're persuasive and we can able to talk back to money, we're good. I got it. That's what it is. I think so too, but we try to argue with maybe if you want to come through.
Henry, how are you? They asked me to come over and talk a little bit about Prop 6. Have you heard of Prop 6? It eliminates some.
Really appreciate it.
A little bit. Or are you coming down to Long Beach Friday? Or San Diego? Sorry.
Yeah.
If board members could make their way to the dais, we could get started.
Mr. Vice Chair. Good.
All right, we'll call to order the September 10th meeting of the Regional Transit Board of Directors. Would the clerk please call the roll to establish a quorum?
Director Budge.
Here.
Director Hansen.
Here.
Director Harris.
Present.
Director Hume and Director Jennings are absent. Director Miller.
Down here?
Director Morin.
Here.
Director Natoli.
Here.
Director Chenier.
Next to down here.
Director Cerna.
Here.
Chair Kennedy.
Here.
With that, we have a quorum at 96 votes.
Thank you.
This meeting of the Sacramento Regional Transit District will be cablecast without interruption on Metro Cable 14, the local government affairs channel. Tonight's meeting will air on Wednesday, September 12th at 1 p.m. and replayed on Thursday, September 13th at 9 a.m. and webcast at www.sacmetrocable.tv. It is also closed caption. Members of the audience wishing to address the board should fill out a speaker card located at the rear of the room and provide it to me or Adam. Please speak into the microphone and state your name for the record. We would appreciate everyone turning off their cell phones. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me extend a special Happy New Year to Director Chenier. So with that, would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Oh, yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First, we have the consent calendar, and Mr. Lonergan is here to make an announcement on item number 2, and I'll read it. Resolution approving a sole source procurement and delegating authority to the general manager CEO to execute a contract for purchase of 6 EV Star electric buses with Green Power Motor Company.
Good evening. So this is an issue that came up just actually this evening, a few minutes ago. We found out that the HVIP discount, because these are zero-emission buses, that we applied is $10,000 too high per bus. We assumed, since our intent was to operate them in a disadvantaged community, that we would be able to take advantage of the slightly higher amount. It equates to $10,000 per bus or $60,000 for the 6 buses we're purchasing. Turns out that is tied to where the buses are actually parked at night. So it's an oddity. We're still arguing the point, but to not have to come back to the board, what we would like to do is let the resolution reflect, rather than $522,000 for the purchase of the buses, it would be $582,000, assuming we're not successful and don't get the full credit. We're still receiving, even at the lower amount, a $600,000 offset on the buses, so it's a substantial credit because they're zero-emission vehicles.
Okay.
So that's the change.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'll move consent. Second.
All right, we have a motion by Director Chenier and a second by Vice Chair Hansen. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
Motion carries at 96 votes. The next item is public addresses the board on matters not on the agenda.
Actually, the next item is introduction of special guests, so let me welcome Mr. Craig Powell, one of our biggest fans, to the meeting this evening. So thank you for being here. And next would be public items not on the agenda. Mr. Lee Scott, A. Lee Scott. Okay.
Chairman Kennedy, the board. My name is Lee Scott. I am a professional driver for Paratransit, Inc. and a shop steward for ATU Local 256. Ralph Nez, the president and business manager for ATU Local 256, has asked that I appear before you this evening to inform you that contract negotiations between ATU Local and Paratransit are underway. Ralph Nez and or his designees may appear at a later date to provide this board with update information on the negotiations. President Nez and the ATU is hopeful the negotiations will progress to a fair settlement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. Appreciate it. Jeffrey Tartagia.
Having fun with that.
Patrick Kennedy, Chairman and
Jeffrey.
Board of, shall we say, Regional Transit. I was at the Transportation Committee of SACOG last week, and this was dealing with one of your resolutions coming up of what we'll call the Proposition 6. And the reminder is in there is that there is 3 paragraphs in there that have a dramatic impact for the future. And I'm hoping that you members are aware of that and understand the likely impact if Proposition 6 does go forward. I am of the opinion, after watching it through there, that that I'm hoping that you can get the message out of no on 6 in an educational manner, and realizing more than just the SB1 funding, that there are other matters that it does impact. The other thing I will also offer to this board is we've had a number of people leave in the way of staffing. And also I see the electronic bulletin boards are not functioning in any manner. I'm hoping the board knows why, or if not, we'll ask the general manager of exactly what is going on with the electronic bulletin boards at the light rail stations, because there's increasing frequency where they do not seem to be functioning. I believe there is a plan, but I would like to think it be publicly disclosed. You are doing other things. I'll see with the eye on Sacramento. There are other areas and aspects that it seems likely that I'm a little concerned that, just like with the STA funding, that until the November ballot, that there is a clear delineation of finances. I have been to 2 Sacramento streetcar meetings, and there has been no mention of RT having a more, should we say, seat on the board to know what is going on. I've also seen records that suggest that you are holding at $209 million and wonder where the thing on 3rd Street is being shown in construction plans and other thing else that the city has made the effort of and expended. And I will appreciate the fact that that although you've taken out the 21st Street bus stop and the 28th bus stop, this is on J Street, that indeed that there will be some satisfactory resolution and making sure that this does not happen on Broadway, where is a future plan as well as some of the other plans. So hope that MAC will be better involved to know what things are going on in the future.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Henry, can we, next time we meet, let's talk about the electronic signage at the light rail stations.
Yes.
Thank you. Russell Rawlings.
All right, good afternoon, board. My name is Russell Rawlings. I am the Director of Advocacy Services at Resources for Independent Living and a member of Sacramento Transit Riders Union. And I'm here today to invite all of you to participate in the upcoming Sac True Ride RT Challenge. We will be conducting that competition from starting on the 16th through the 22nd. You can participate by using the hashtag SacRTChallenge. And if you post a picture of yourself, you get credit. And if you post a picture with a constituent, you get, I think it's triple credit. So if you, or get a constituent to post a picture of you, you get triple credit, right? So look forward to seeing all of your participation. And I know that we've already gotten some feedback. So I, for one, think that it's also valid to give feedback with the hashtag during the competition. I will advocate for some credit for that, too. So thank you.
Thank you very much. You are challenging my abilities to social network. Art Ketterling, please.
Thank you, Board. I was wanting to bring up a situation and all that with the Smart Ride. I arranged the ride early of a morning on your last meeting date, which would have been August 27th, and they told me within 15 to 30 minutes. Oh, and when I called back to verify later in the day, that they said that they kept telling me anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. Then they told me half an hour to an hour, and then 45 more minutes more. Well, when I got here, the meeting had just ended, the RT meeting from the last time, and I turned around and went back. But I was hoping that I would make it, but I didn't. I almost didn't make it this time at all, from what I understand, because that they were so busy, from what I heard, that that they have been getting more and more, a lot of response, which is a good thing. But at the same time, there's one thing that I wish that RT would do, and the people that works with you, that I would like to have them at least mention if they are going to be late, then, and I know that I wouldn't be able to get over, I would like to know that. So that's my concern. But I know in one way it's good, another way it isn't so good when you don't know. And I was wanting to bring this up to the board on it. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Art. Apparently we are a victim of our own success in a certain amount, but I saw Mr. Lonergan taking notes back there, so I'm sure that we will be addressing this. Next item.
Item number 7, new business, resolution, consideration of a resolution opposing Proposition 6, which would repeal Senate Bill 1, Chapter 5, Statutes of 2017, the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017, presented by Deborah Salinas.
Good evening, Chair Kennedy and members of the SAC-RT Board. The issue before you today is a resolution asking the SAC-RT Board of Directors to take a position on a ballot measure to protect millions of dollars in future transit funding. SAC-RT's government affairs efforts focus on protecting state and federal transit funding sources the district receives. In seeking legislation to significantly increase funding for transit operations, we were very pleased when the historic Senate Bill 1 was enacted, containing the funding for public transit long sought in previous measures leading up to Governor Brown's signature in spring 2017. We commended the governor and the California legislature for their efforts in passing SB 1, the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. As outlined in the issue paper before you, the calculation for SAC-RT would bring an estimated additional $6 million in funding annually, with the potential to apply for millions more in competitive grant funding for discretionary transit projects, such as the TIRCP grant that allowed for Folsom double tracking. The revenues SB 1 will generate will allow SAC-RT to enhance our public transit investments for the region by accelerating the state of good repair work on our system. Today, SAC-RT is focused on meeting and exceeding the transportation needs of our capital region to provide seamless connections between neighboring transit services. Stable and predictable funding levels greatly determine what the future of public transportation will look like in the Sacramento region, and staff recommends the board adopt no on Proposition 6 to protect and keep SB 1 funding in place. SAC-RT is a founding member of the California Transit Association, which was instrumental in SB 1's investment in public transit to help ensure that every Californian benefit from improved transportation network. Here to give you an update on the no on Prop 6 and emphasize the urgency of statewide efforts to protect SB 1 funding is the Executive Director of CTA, Josh Shaw. Please welcome to the podium, Josh Shaw.
been a long time since I had an applause for a
Yeah,
welcome.
that's more than I've ever gotten, so.
Thank you, Deborah. Mr. Chair and board members, I am Joshua Shaw, Executive Director of the California Transit Association. Thank you for having me speak tonight to Proposition 6. Many of you are familiar, I think, with the work of our association. As you heard, SACRT has long been an active participant. Your general manager and CEO is on our executive committee. Many of your staff participate throughout our organization on our various educational committees and professional development opportunities. But if you don't know, the California Transit Association is like the California State Association of Counties for transit, or for the League of California Cities for transit. As a nonprofit trade organization representing the state's public transportation agencies, our mission is to support the needs of California's public transit systems through advocacy and education. On the advocacy front, I've spent the better part of my time from about 2015 right up through the spring of 2017 advocating with you, your lobbying team in the Capitol, other members of our association, cities, counties, other stakeholders, for a new source of transportation funding to address the widening gap between the needs of our citizens for a safer, more seamless, connected, well-maintained transportation system and the ability of state and local governments to pay for that system. With the passage of Senate Bill 1 in spring of 2017, as you heard, our efforts came together around a consensus measure that was supposed to begin to fill that funding gap. However, now we are faced with Proposition 6. Simply put, Prop 6 eliminates more than $5 billion annually in existing transportation funding, including wiping out more than $700 million a year dedicated to public transportation. Prop 6 also makes our bridges and roads less safe and jeopardizes public safety. This ill-conceived measure is opposed by a broad coalition of public safety, business, labor, local governments, and other stakeholders, including, just to name a few, the California Professional Firefighters, California Association of Highway Patrolmen, American Society of Civil Engineers, the League of California Cities, CSAC, the Transit Association, environmental groups like the Sierra Club, California League of Conservation Voters, Environmental Defense Fund, the Natural Resources Defense Council, et cetera. Labor groups like the California Labor Fed, AFL-CIO, the Building and Construction Trades Council, et cetera, Service Employees International, business groups like the California Chamber of Commerce, all are opposed, including individual cities, counties, transit agencies, and others. There's more than 350 groups, last time I counted, who are opposed to Prop 6. It eliminates funding for more than 6,500 projects currently underway in every single community in California. Projects will stop making roads and transit worse. Prop 6 eliminates funds that are accountable to the voters. Just in June of this year, voters overwhelmingly approved Proposition 69, which dedicates the underlying transportation revenues solely and only to the transportation projects and services we've been talking about in your community. Moreover, Prop 6 would eliminate 68,000 good-paying jobs and about $183 billion in economic investments as thousands of road and transit construction projects are put to a stop and as our people become stuck in worsening traffic congestion. Local governments and public transit leaders oppose Prop 6 for very clear reasons, including it robs our communities of vital public transit and transportation improvement funds. Deborah and I both mentioned more than $700 million a year is dedicated only to public transportation agencies. She also mentioned you can compete with other agencies for sources of funds that are flexible. More than $350 million more is available to transit. That's more than $1 billion a year available to public transit right now. That is a historic level of public transit funding. So that's what's at risk. We are confident that voters will reject Prop 6 once they learn that it will make our bridges, roads, and transportation system less safe, and that it will eliminate funding for thousands of projects around the state, including a devastating impact on Sacramento Regional Transit District services. Our broad coalition of public safety leaders, engineers, business, labor, environmentalists, and community leaders will wage an active campaign between now and November to educate the voters. While you cannot, of course, as a public agency get involved in that campaign, you certainly may take a position for or against the measure, so we appreciate your consideration tonight of staff's recommendation to oppose Prop 6, and your agency may certainly educate the citizens of this region as to the harmful effects of the measure were it to pass on your systems, projects, and services, just as laid out in the staff report and the resolution before you. So thank you for your consideration tonight, and as a resident of this community who often uses your services, I thank you for all of your efforts as local elected and appointed leaders and on this board to bring more and better mobility options to our region, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have or your board members, Mr. Chair, about Proposition 6. Thank you.
Is this specifically a question?
No, just on the resolution itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
first we have, thank you very much. Is there any questions specifically to the speaker? No? Okay, then Director Harris first.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to move the resolution opposing Proposition 6. Prop 6 would be devastating to all of the projects that we are generating, both at RT and STA, and the collaboration of the two organizations. Additionally, just in the city of Sacramento alone, our pavement condition index will plummet without SB1 money. This is essential, that is really, I feel, essential to the state that Proposition 6 is defeated. So I'm all in favor of this resolution.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor by Director Harris and a second by the Vice Chair. In the meantime, Director Natoli and then Cerna.
Yeah. I understand the content of the resolution. I guess I would just say that, certainly hearing the presentation, a couple of words here, I think that we could simply oppose Proposition 6. We can state all the reasons why or not. But when you use the word robs, I think that's a little bit out there, and I think different choice of words. It was quoted from the podium a moment ago. And secondly, you make the case for why it's important. I get it, but I don't think you necessarily need to say that it's going to make air quality worse and harm the environment. You can draw those conclusions if you like. I think for this body to state its opposition, the impact of this district, what it may mean to our communities, to our municipalities in our county, in our region, is one thing. But I think throwing in words like that really overstates it. It may be what people believe, but I think if we're going to have a resolution, an official action by this body, you got to look at stating that in a way that maybe has a clearer meaning to it. I object to that wording. Robbing has a certain connotation. We can say that if we like, but I don't think it needs to be an official resolution.
Thank you. Director Cerna.
Thank you. Well, I'm prepared to support the resolution. I have to admit, though, I was a little disappointed that we don't have a whereas that's part of the resolution that acknowledges the fact that not just this transit agency, but all the transit agencies across the state of California actually received kind of dual benefit, if you will, because there is obviously funding that is specifically acknowledged, identified as part of SB1 that is directed to serve transit agencies with their ability to carry out their missions. But what's obvious about the Senate bill is the fact that much of the funding is aimed at improving our surface transportation system, fixing the degrading and conditions of our pavement, as Board Member Harris mentioned, and fixing crumbling bridge abutments, things that are of obviously of a public safety nature. So I would like to suggest, and I know we don't oftentimes like to do this from the dais, but I'd like to suggest that we, as a friendly amendment to the motion, some language that would at least acknowledge that that other benefit that is implicit in SB1. And I'm working on some languages, so I'm fiercely typing here. I don't know if there are other board members that have comments or questions, but I should have it wrapped up and ready for board consideration by the time you get back to me.
We do, and we have public comment, so you're in good shape.
Good.
Vice Chair.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to go after public comment if you want.
Okay. We've got public comment. We have several cards for the next item as well, so I'm going to ask that the clerk put 2 minutes instead of our customary 3, because we have some members that are going to have to go, and the next item is something that I would like to have full participation if we can. So if you do 2 minutes, first is Mike Barnbaum.
Good evening, Chair Kennedy, members of the board, and I know a very similar, if not the same item at 7 p.m. is on the Board of Directors meeting of the Yolo County Transportation District. So the speakers before this will be brief, so we can get them to that meeting as well. Ride Downtown 916 feels very strongly about defeating Proposition 6 in the November election. We've met with several of our folks about this and just how unsafe the bridges and the roads that transit operates on would be if Proposition 6 passes. We're glad that we've been able to work with you and some immediate past boards since our forming to bring some ridership building initiatives, or we'll market that, Chris, as RBIs. And some of them focus on downtown, like the light rail every 15 minutes starting. I got clarification, the date is Sunday, January 6th. 15-minute service on weekends will officially begin. So on the blue and gold line. So this is a very dangerous proposition. I've been myself a voter since November of 1992, and I've never come across anything as dangerous as Proposition 6. So with that, fully agree with the board's conversation, and let the record show that I'll be an aye vote in the no on Proposition 6 for the fall ballot 2018. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for reminding me how much older I am than you. Helen O'Connell.
Helen O'Connell, and I just want to let you know that you're not alone for the no on 6 ballot. SAC-TRU is backing you up with that, and I don't know anybody that is in favor of Proposition 6, so I just wanted to let you know that you have more constituents out here to support your point of view.
Thank you, Helen. Now, Vice Chair Hansen, and then Mr. Cerna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad that Mr. Shaw was recognized by the audience. He does tremendous work. Prop 6 would really threaten not only the things that we've talked about are benefits, but the long-term viability of regional transit, paratransit, and our city's ability to continue growing and thriving as a economic center for the region. So I know that there's going to be a little wordsmithing. I'm not sure how many people will read what we will write, but I think that the gist of it being that keeping SB1 intact, rejecting Prop 6 is absolutely the right thing to do to support our riders and our long-term system.
Thank you. Mr. Cerna.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest as a friendly amendment to the motion an additional paragraph, an additional whereas that would read as follows. Whereas the passage of Proposition 6 would greatly compromise state of good repair efforts aimed at improving California's surface transportation network, serving many of the state's transit systems, including Sacramento Regional Transit District.
Mr. Chair, I have no objection to the friendly amendment. You know, these are all points that need to be made, so the gist of it, as the Vice Chair said, is that we defeat Prop 6, and that does no harm to that goal.
Second on the motion? Yep. Okay. All right, we have any other questions, comments by the board? Mr. Natoli.
Yeah, if I could just offer then maybe some thoughts about it. I pointed out the words I felt were a bit overstated, at least in my view, and still being in opposition to Proposition 6. I would suggest maybe on the whereas, the last whereas on the first page where it says whereas Proposition 6 robs our communities, maybe deprives our communities would be a better choice of word, or deprives communities.
Let's do this one at a time. Maker of the motion.
Jeff, are you okay with deprives?
I'm feeling deprived, yeah.
Okay. Seconder? Okay, we got that.
Depraved or deprived?
All right.
And then the next whereas on the adjoining page, where it says Proposition 6 will make worse, I would say, could negatively impact air quality and the environment, and then it goes on to say how that would happen. So I would suggest that as being a better choice of words.
I'm also feeling impacted.
All right, we're impacted and we're.
So are we done changing?
Yes, I believe.
The resolution?
All right.
Then moved with the change.
And the seconder is good for all that.
Why not?
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain.
Motion carries at 96 votes.
Thank you. Next item.
Next item, item number 8, information. Update regarding the potential use of a portion of the Proposition 1A high-speed rail funding program for the downtown Riverfront streetcar project in advance of the Small Starts Grant Agreement, presented by Mark Lonergan.
Chair Kennedy and members of the board, this is an information item being presented at the request of the Riverfront Streetcar Joint Powers Authority. The request is to release $3.5 million of the $25 million of Prop 1A funds that the SAC-RT board is committed to the project. In committing the $25 million in Prop A funds to the Riverfront Streetcar project, the SAC-RT board placed several conditions on the use of the money, one of which was that the project has received a Small Starts grant agreement from the FTA. The project is yet to receive the SSGA, which is expected by February or March of next year. Project staff have projected that the project needs an additional $6.1 million, I should say $6.1 million, not additional to the budget, to continue the project through June 30, 2019, which would encompass the receipt of the SSGA and the availability of the $100 million in federal funding. The project owners, the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento, have committed an additional $2.6 million to the project and have requested that the SAC-RT board release the balance, which is $3.5 million. As a reminder, the project's design and construction budget includes $9 million from the city of Sacramento and $35 million from the city of West Sacramento. Both cities have contributed $9 million apiece, $18 million in total, toward the design and construction of the project to date. Should the SAC-RT approve the use of this money, project staff will need to present an allocation request to the CTC at their October meeting. The next CTC meeting would be in December. They skipped the November meeting, which would be too late to be of assistance to the project. At the current rate of expenditure and considering eligible local match, approximately $1 million of the $3.5 million would be expended before the SSGA is received, assuming a February-March receipt. If SAC-RT does not approve the release of this money, the project would either need to request additional funding from the two cities as the project owners or significantly slow the project down. This latter option would add delay and cost to the project overall. Staff is seeking direction from the SAC-RT board on how to proceed. There are several possible options, some of which include approval of the release of the $3.5 million with the condition that the CTC determines that the use of any or all of this funding is eligible for expenditure at this point in the project. A second option might be approval of the release of the $3.5 million with the condition that that SAC-RT be reimbursed by the project owner should the Riverfront Streetcar project not proceed, or as an alternative, the CTC or Caltrans determines that the use of any or all of the funding was ineligible and requires reimbursement by the state. If the SAC-RT board would like to take action on this item, it will be calendared as an action item at the September 24th meeting. Staff is requesting direction from the board on how to proceed.
Thank you. Questions? Okay, great. We will go to public comment. Barbara Stanton.
Good evening, Chair and members. Ridership for the Masses maintains its non-support for the streetcar project as a whole and any subsequent funding for the project. We also maintain this project will, in the long run, negatively affect SAC-RT and its riders. Eventually, the burden of running and maintaining the streetcar will fall to RT. Will or does RT have funding sources lined up for the necessary operating expenses without placing a burden on its riders? Currently, Regional Transit has 3 large projects in the works: Smart Ride, demand service, route optimization, rolling back fares, and expansion of light rail service. As we see it, these projects will eventually produce a more user-friendly and affordable transit service that fits the needs of Sacramento's present and future riders. We fail to understand where the streetcar project fits into the direction SAC-RT is moving. We do support, however, the opposition to Prop 6, and we'll do anything that we can to support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Craig Powell.
Chair Kennedy, always good to see you. Members
sir.
of the board. I try to make an annual trip here to the RT board. I think I'm about on that schedule. I want to introduce a couple of people from Ion Sacramento. I think you know Stephen Barassa, who is the chairman of our Transportation Committee, and Dennis Neufeld, who is also on the Transportation Committee, both of whom are directors of Ion Sacramento. It's no secret that Ion Sacramento is implacably opposed to this project. It is poorly conceived. It has no transit values. It doesn't get people out of cars. It doesn't reduce the number of miles traveled. It will congest downtown traffic because it travels so slow and not in an isolated, segregated lane. It has been rejected by the voters when they've had a chance to vote on it, and not just by a small margin, by over a 20% margin, less margin than what was required to pass the tax back in 2015. The voters of downtown and midtown resoundingly rejected this. So the only time this has been subject to a democratic test, the test turned thumbs down. And the people you hear today, there is no public support for this whatsoever. This has the support of one very well-heeled, very politically juiced developer. And that developer happens to sit on the policy steering committee for the streetcar. Don't you find it ironic that RT, who's being asked to cough up millions tonight or proposed in the future, has no seat at that policy steering committee, yet two of the members of that policy committee are local developers, or at least one of them, and that developer has an amazing conflict of interest, a huge financial conflict of interest, because of his ownership of massive tracts of land right along the proposed route. It's egregious. Now, this project was always going to be an egg that's going to land on RT. We predicted that from the very beginning, that the two cities would treat RT like the red-headed speck child that it has so much in the past. And this is a perfect example. They want you to tap your bond funds for $3.5 million, waive your protective conditions, which was responsible to not spend that money for a dime on this project until you had guaranteed federal funding. We urge you to put this thing back in the awful case it came in and never consider it again. And if and when you get your federal funding, spend the money if that's your druthers. We oppose it, but it's the financially responsible thing to do at this time, to reject this proposal, protect RT's budget, protect its capital funds.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Dennis Neufeld. Please try to keep it to 2 minutes.
Yes, sir. I have 3 comments to bring up in this matter to keep in mind when this money is again requested, and you might have to put this on the ballot or on your agenda here on the 24th. First, none of this money should be spent on the streetcar project until you get all the construction bids thoroughly analyzed and received. Number 2, as was originally approved last year when this matter came up, no Prop 1A funds were to be allocated until the Federal Transportation Administration approved the small starts application. And I urge that you maintain that petition and that condition. And number 3, all Sacramento City Council members should consider abstaining from voting on, if it does get on the agenda, because they have a conflict of interest regarding the spending of Prop 1A funds. They have failed to bring enough money to this project, and I think once that's been realized, then here we are with their tin cup to come and get more money from the Prop 1A funds, when they should approve this at the council level and pull their weight on the fair share of this project.
Thank you, sir. Delphine Cathcart.
Good evening, Chair Kennedy and directors. I am Delphine Cathcart. I'm a member of Sacramento Transit Advocates and Riders, otherwise known as STAR. Just some historical context. Prior to Mr. Lee's leadership, SAC-RT faced serious financial difficulties, which depleted their reserves, forced layoffs, raised fares, and threatened 1/3 of the bus service in our system. STAR does not want to see a return to that. In light of the uncertainty surrounding SB 1 transportation funding, as well as federal funding in the future, maintaining existing service and building ridership and a strong reserve must be RT's funding priorities. The streetcar project must overcome a variety of serious issues before it can get a grant agreement with the FDA. In light of this uncertainty surrounding the streetcar, SAC-RT should have a promise that its funds will not be wasted. There must be a guarantee from the city that if the streetcar does not obtain the grant agreement or is not built, RT's Prop 1A money will be refunded. STAR urges the board not to approve any release of the funds until the project receives the grant agreement from the FTA or the city guarantees the refund of the money, should the project not get the grant agreement. STAR also supports your resolution to oppose Proposition 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stephen Barassa.
Hi, I'm Stephen Barassa, Ion Sacramento. I commend the staff for a great report as always, very thorough, except there's a third item that wasn't pointed out, a third option that was discussed at the JPA streetcar board meeting in August. Third option is they can tap the cap and trade $30 million funds right now. The only caveat is they have to have a reimbursement agreement if the project goes belly up. So this idea that they need to get into the Prop 1A funds is really an attempt to put the burden of risk on RT. Remove the full funding grant agreement, give us the money. Soundly, many funding groups have put that in place, that a reimbursement agreement is necessary. And, if you were to move forward, that certainly should be in place with the Prop 1A funds, but it's really redundant. They already have access to the cap and trade funds. Jeff Harris at that board meeting said that the two cities can't keep coughing up money indefinitely to chase after this project. It's getting a little tedious. There comes a cutoff time where we just can't invest anymore on a promise. So, the FTA, the other thing is this money will only be used to advance the project into 2019, but there's really no guarantee that it'll cross the finish line and get that full funding grant agreement. The TFA Transportation for America is pressuring the feds to get that money, but the FTA is unequivocally, can I get that word, clear, saying that Sacramento and other grantees have not yet fulfilled all requirements to obtain the funding. Sacramento has not completed all critical third-party agreements, developed a firm and reliable cost estimate, and has not satisfactorily demonstrated the technical capacity to undertake the project. Also, funding is seriously in question as well. I just need 10 more.
Just wrap it up.
Yeah, the other key point is James Corliss from SACOG acknowledged that the construction and labor costs are going to rise. And this is no greater highlighted than in Orange County, where the streetcar project listed at $299 million in 2017 has now ballooned up to $407 million in costs. So I urge the board not to advance this to an action item. It's redundant and it puts unnecessary risk on the RT. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Russell Rawlings.
Good afternoon again, board. Russell Rawlings, member of Sacramento Transit Riders Union. And we have been before you before, and thanks to staff's hard work, we've seen a list of eligible Prop 1A projects. These are projects that cannot proceed if the money is tied up elsewhere. You've heard some compelling arguments as to why RT should not commit these funds. I recommend that they not be committed, and especially if cap and trade is an option. There are other options. The JPA should be responsible for its own funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey Tartagia. I want to commend everybody. You're doing fabulously on the 2 minutes. Appreciate it.
You heard about Orange County. Los Angeles County is $291 million right now, and likewise faces these same constraints, and realizing that every time the costs escalate. So this is something that I will offer to you as saying, please, as the boondoggle that deals with Measure U, that is going to be something, if it fails, is going to put already more constraints. Why is this being continued before November election? It seems like you are putting the cart before the horse. It seems like you should be, after as long as this has taken place, is you should be waiting and figuring out a clear sense. And I really would like to see the city of Sacramento commit way more dollars, considering the amount that West Sacramento has put dollars in. And I note that Rick and Pat, who last time Pat was the major one, I believe, that said, until these agreements were fulfilled, I'm voting no on this. You have an interesting group of people that are here right now that whether you take action forward, it is your responsibility. You may delegate it to the general manager to enact these things, but it is your responsibility. So please consider the factor. And Andy, I understand you no longer you'll be leaving politics pretty soon. So, hey, it would be nice if that dear old Folsom would be something that would be a potential project that goes forward rather than the streetcar on the route that it is.
Thank you, Jeffrey. All right, that's all the public comments that I have as far as cards received. Is there any questions? Yes, Vice Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Chair Kennedy. I have a couple of questions first, and then I want to ask staff to think about how we come back on this. First of all, to our legal counsel here, I know that somebody said that the city council members here have a conflict of interest. Ms. Sanchez Ochoa, have you determined that there is a conflict of interest such that we should recuse ourselves from any vote?
Sorry, my mic won't go on. There probably isn't a 1090 violation, which is a standard violation that you would have to be worried about, which is that you personally benefit from this.
There probably isn't, or is there? Is
well,
not?
there isn't, unless you guys have some connection to the construction of this that I'm not aware of. But as board members, no. There could be an appearance of a conflict because the city does benefit, but as you all may know, when you sit on this board, you are supposed to vote in the best interest of regional transit because you're regional transit directors. So that is the expectation, that you would be doing what is in the best interest of this agency in your role as director.
And isn't it true that because everybody on this board is appointed by a city or jurisdiction, that we've never had a policy that when a particular project is in their jurisdiction that they recuse themselves?
Correct. Not that I'm aware of. We've never had a
because it is our fiduciary duty here to represent the best interests of
regional transit. Correct.
Yep. Okay, thank you. The other question I have is related to cap and trade money as an option. Mr. Lonergan, is that truly an option? Because I was told that cap and trade money could only be used for actual construction but not for pre-development costs.
Well, my understanding is that we're precluded from tapping the cap and trade money until there is a grant agreement in place, and that's from CalSTA.
Okay.
We did explore that option, or that option was explored by project staff before this direction was selected.
Since you have the microphone, Mr. Lonergan, I want to bring up the issue of the 1985 agreement that the city had with regional transit. And I believe when we had this money before, this Prop 1A question before the board previously, it was somewhat tied to benefits received from the city of Sacramento in revision of the 1985 agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct. There were several conditions that related to the release of the Prop 1A money for the project. The revision of the 1985 agreement with the city was one of them. That was accomplished. A resolution to the storage track and station relocation issue in the Sacramento Valley Station was another. That one was accomplished as well. And I would say our relationship with city staff in Sacramento is very good.
I think that there are probably so is that the amended and restated light rail operations and maintenance agreement? That's the one you said was accomplished.
Uh-huh.
And then also I think there was a resolution to the location of light rail storage vehicles from the Sacramento Valley Station. I believe that was accomplished.
Yes, sir.
And then we had an obligation, the city of Sacramento, I should say, had an obligation to also continue to partner with Regional Transit in good faith to identify dollars that we could mutually apply for to benefit the system in the city. Is that?
That's true, too.
Okay. And those things have largely been done and accomplished?
The outstanding one, of course, is identifying funding. In the I think that's the only one that's still, ongoing.
So from the standpoint of the board of directors here, the bargain and the benefit with the city of Sacramento, those obligations by the city have largely been fulfilled to this point to the agency.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Steve, can I clarify one thing?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. My understanding on the relocation is that the value of that and what the city will put out is somewhere in the $10 to $11 million range.
That's my understanding as well.
So those are funds that the city will pick up as we move forward on relocation.
From RT's perspective, the city is committed to relocate the station and provide permanent storage track.
Right.
From the city's perspective, RT may face a bit of a challenge if we ever extend the full loop to build the Green Line, but that's an RT issue, a project issue for the Green Line, not reflecting the city's obligation.
But the city's commitment will be about $10 to $11 million.
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
I think also just the restatement of the 1985 agreement at the time, it was very one-sided and put RT on the hook for all costs related to projects initiated by the city, but now those costs are going to be borne equally or in a fair share model.
Yeah, we have an agreement that is less lopsided. I would say that the city has acted in good faith and fulfilled everything that was fulfillable, unless they have a pot of gold somewhere that they haven't shared with us for the future funding. Everything that can be done was done in a very timely way.
Do you know what the ongoing value of that change in cost reimbursement is?
It's really project by project. I mean, really what we've done is agreed to build our respective betterments into each of the projects as they move forward, as opposed to RT being responsible for city project costs that were increased as a consequence of the presence of the light rail system. So
but there's a really significant value.
Absolutely. It's just hard to put a dollar to because it's project specific.
Thank you. I think that, well, a lot of us are concerned, myself included, about the Trump administration, how they view transit and the general availability of money for not only light rail projects, but bus replacement projects and small starts projects like this. We have invested a significant amount to try to bring this project to fruition. I think, though, one of the things that would be wise, given the congressional balance of power, which may change, who knows, later this year, but ultimately the status of this administration, I would like, before this item comes back to the board, us to do a few things, and probably in consultation with the JPA staff and potentially with the two cities. One is scenario planning, because I think the public raises some very valid questions about what our long-term strategy is here, particularly in the scenarios where that we're most concerned about. One is where the project goes out to bid and comes back and it's substantially over the budget. So what happens in that scenario? Do we remove parts of the project to try to meet the budget? Is the bid being designed in that way? Are there other options that we are not considering related to scale and scope of the project that could help value engineer the project? The second piece is risk mitigation. Sorry, the second alternative is if we don't get a full funding grant agreement, and what is the value of any of this work in the event that the federal government, the FTA, the Trump administration deny the ability of the agency to receive a full funding grant agreement to deliver the project. Both cities have expended about $9 million. There may be, if this board decides to advance, to apply to the CTC for $3.5 million, and should they approve that, an additional amount of money invested. Is there any value to the project from the standpoint of potentially connecting light rail to West Sacramento, to relocating light rail from K to H, or from any other improvements at the Sacramento Valley Station, or from those the additional storage track that the city may create because of our work here? The second piece is, I understand from John Valsecchi and Mr. Trost, who are staffing the JPA, that these funds aren't really needed until the second half of this fiscal year, so beginning in January through the end of June of 2019. That means, though, that we have some time to understand where the budget is related to bidding. The project's supposed to go out to bid in October. Those bids are supposed to be back in December. I think that staff should bring back with any funding decision for this board mitigation recommendations. Should those bids come in over, what happens? Should the decision to keep spending money related to Prop 1A funds come back to this board in January to assess that and to make a decision about whether to continue the project? And I'm sure that will be done in consultation with the staff from the project management team. And then the other risks that are looked at in that scenario planning. If for some reason FTA just is not issuing any grants, we are being told right now that we should have a definitive answer on the full funding grant agreement in March of next year, is what I was told today. And definitive hopefully means that by March of next year that we have an answer from FTA. So does that mean that we can, stage that money such that it is not released from regional transit to support the activities, so that we can mitigate any potential loss should a grant agreement not be forthcoming, or we need to engage in some other scenario planning? I think that's most of it. The only other thing I'd say is, as members who are elected to other bodies and then serve on this, it's not lost on me that I'm appointed to like 18 different boards, commissions, and things, and those are often complex relationships. Ultimately, the public should hold us accountable to make sure that we're making the best interest of the we're voting in the best interest of the public based on the role that we're in at the moment. But ultimately, it's my particular residents who will have a chance, and some of them are here, to assess me in March of 2020 on my performance, and that hopefully will be a less painful process than trying to get a full funding grant agreement from the federal government.
One point of, I guess, addition, if I may, we just actually recently found out that the federal government did approve 2 full funding grant agreements, one for Orange County very recently, and the other for the Seattle extension, yeah. So they are beginning to break out of the Trump administration, break loose.
But I know that a lot of times we give Ion Sacramento and some of the advocates here grief for the things that they ask us, the hard questions, the oversight. But I think that's the sign of a functional public. And to make sure that the board is doing their work, that we've thought through these things. There's millions of dollars on the line with a potential decision here, but there's also the long-term viability of regional transit, and we want to do the best job we can, and we cannot do that without people like Craig and Stephen and Dee Dee, and even you, Dennis. Dennis and I have a fun time bantering, but I think it's healthy to have these conversations, to ask these questions, and hopefully to get the kind of answers that will allay the concerns of the public.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think Director Hansen certainly interjected some more question marks into this equation, but I guess I just wanted to ask very briefly about, in the report itself, and you were seeking direction that might bring this back to us as soon as the next meeting. It sounded like from Director Hansen's comments, maybe anticipating something that would postpone that for some time. But of the funds that we requested, the $3.5 million, the direction we gave last June was it only would be for construction-related activities, and it would have the contingency, obviously, of the full FTA approval. So what's being asked here of the $3.5 million, that at least was the mark that was put on the table, about 1/3 of those would actually could be assigned to construction-related costs, but the other 2.6, as I understand it, would be for design activities ongoing?
No, of the $3.5 million that would come from Prop 1A, my understanding is all of that would be for construction-related activities per the definition that the CTC applies to that, and that's really any activity that's not design. So this would be focused primarily on covering our costs for procurements, for beginning to put in place some of the project controls that we will need for construction, for scheduling, those kinds of activities that are not specific to design. All of those are considered eligible construction-related expenses from the CTC and Caltrans and Prop 1A.
Okay, I guess, and then just with that, I appreciate that clarification then. So as it relates to a allocation request that would be coming before us, we have the ability, again, obviously, to talk it through this, with this board as a point of focus, at least on the question of a reimbursement agreement from the entities, and whether it be from the JPA itself or from the city of West Sacramento, or certainly city of Sacramento. I guess I would just say that if that were this come back to us, and we may know more based upon what Director Hansen said as we would have this presented to us, that's certainly, if we were to consider this in any way, shape, or form, that would be a very important point, because there are other needs that this entity, again, putting the RT hat on here, and certainly recognize our involvement in this project, would be very important considerations, that if for some reason there was some commitment made and that $3.5 million were obligated and no reimbursement were available, and then something else happened with the project, that's $3.5 million less that this agency would have available to it to fund some very, I think, important priorities. So I would just say that if this comes back in whatever form for discussion and or action, I would like to at least have before us some opportunity to know what that reimbursement might look like and how that would be structured. And lastly, I would just add a comment, and this goes to some of the discussion we had a little earlier this summer. I appreciate the representation that Director Harris and Hansen provide on that body, but the fact that RT doesn't have, beyond the representation from the two of them or those seats, doesn't have direct participation on that body, and I understand that some of our brethren on the other side of the river may have had concern about that. It seems to me that depending on how deep we get into this project, funding or otherwise, that assuring that beyond the representation that two colleagues and those seats provide be an important aspect to have it on the table for consideration as we get deeper into this. Thanks.
Okay, I know Director Moran has a question, but I wanted to first of all clarify that. So, Mr. Lee and I knew that there would be some substantive issues and questions on this. That's why we made it a two-step process. So we're not deciding anything here today. It's an informational item. But our full intention is to come back on September 24th at that meeting and bring this to a conclusion. So we're not going to draw this thing out beyond that. Is the plan at this point? I do think that Mr. Natoli is correct in that one of the parts of the discussion should be is to looking at how we have more effective representation of RT on a JPA beyond just city members. So, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, and I would just add my support for looking at some sort of a reimbursement agreement. And there's a number of reasons for that, and some of it's been articulated. There's risk going forward with any construction project right now that's large because of the bidding climate, and we don't know where this is going to end up. I mean, we're hearing that within a few months we'll start to get some sort of an idea, and I think we all fear the news might be kind of tough there. But I would have a real difficult time supporting anything without some sort of a reimbursement agreement. And there's a number of reasons for that, but one of them, which is very important to me, is the city of Folsom is strongly considering full annexation into the agency. And I think that's a good message when I point to how this body deliberates and how the staff operates the system in this day and age, is to be able to point to the good stewardship of what we do with the resources of this agency. And we deliberated this $25 million a year or two ago, and that was a difficult vote for me, I'll be honest, but it did make sense in one manner, is that it did enable us the ability to potentially leverage some significant money coming from state and federal sources. Seeing that that's not assured yet, I'll just feel a lot more comfortable if there's some sort of a reimbursement agreement in place. So.
Okay. Mr. Schneer.
Thank you. A couple questions. First of all, Mr. Lonergan, has there been to date any discussion with the cities on a reimbursement decision? Because I've been involved with this for a while. I haven't heard.
No, there haven't been any discussions. I would say there's two elements to possible reimbursement. One would be a reimbursement if one step back, if the project proceeds, obviously this is a moot point, all the
Correct.
money is into the project. If the project does not proceed for whatever reason, then that would be when the reimbursement agreement would kick in. And actually, there's one other condition that I'll get to in a moment. The reimbursement agreement, from a general perspective, doesn't logically make sense up front, because the city of West Sacramento could just fund it now. And they're the entity with the most construction money still in the budget and on the table. If that's a condition that releases the money, then that's what we would take back to the JPA for their response. The other condition is that for some reason, and we have vetted this to the extent we can, but if for some reason Caltrans or the CTC determines at a later date that the money has been spent in an ineligible fashion, that at that point RT would be reimbursed. That, although we've not discussed it with the JPA, that's consistent with the philosophy that RT not be harmed in the streetcar project. And that actually could happen whether or not the project moves forward.
So let's focus on the first piece, which is the cities. And just so as a question, I know, how long did it take to get to the governance agreement? In months or years?
Oh, gosh, yeah, over a year.
So we're talking about something that we're kind of throwing into the pot at this point with estimated need to get this done by the end of the month so they can go to CTC. Because my understanding on the timeline of all this, and I appreciate Mr. Hansen's comments, because I think they laid out a thoughtful way of thinking about this on timeline, which actually gives us some touch points as we go forward, particularly around the construction bids. And we all have, I think, reasonable fears around the construction bids. So I just, on the reimbursement stuff, it would be nice. It's not going to happen certainly by September 24th. So I'm hoping people don't think that's going to happen within the next 2 weeks, given what we've gone through on this. I think that what I would like to do also is make a request from Mr. Lee or Mark Lonergan from you as well. I've seen some information on kind of risk assessment for all of this, because I think that some of the questions that we've heard both from the audience here and otherwise have been risk around the project itself, some related to the 3.5 million, but it's more attuned to the project, and I'd love to see that risk assessment come back the 24th as well, of where we are. And we've done some of that in the past and some of that discussion, but I think there's a risk and reward piece here. Particularly if someone says, well, your operating expenses are going to take away from some other projects that we're doing. That shouldn't be the case, because we've signed agreements with the cities that the two cities will be wholly responsible for the operations of streetcar. So there's a lot of pieces. I'm glad we didn't go back and relitigate the 25 million today. That was my fear, and that we're sticking to the 3.5 as basically an advance on money that this board has already committed. So that's where I'd like to go, and I'd look forward to the discussion on the 24th of the month. And Mr. Hansen, thank you for kind of laying out what you did. I think that's very helpful as a way to think about it, to give us touch points as we go on this, particularly around the construction bids.
And I will say that project staff is already well down that path, so providing that information on the 24th should be something that we can do.
I think the other thing, thank you, appreciate that. The other thing that I'd like to see as we come back is, of the 3.5, how much of that is recycled back into staff costs for RT? I know you've looked at that information as well. I think that's an important component of all this. So a lot of what we're doing here is funding, have been funding, and will continue to fund work by RT as a vendor in this. They're the contractor building this as we go forward. I think that would be important as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Director Natoli, followed by Vice Chair Hansen.
Yeah, I want to get a clarification, because you made a point that I wrote down here, Mark, a moment ago, and I heard the earlier staff report that both cities put in $9 million apiece thus far, but you said West Sacramento could fund it themselves, and that would, and so is it a matter of risk consideration? I mean, obviously they're part of a JPA, but if that's the case, our funds aren't any less precious than what may be precious to the city of West Sacramento. And so I guess, and maybe I get some elaboration from my colleagues here, we can have information for that on the 24th. I would just say, though, that's an important statement because, again, recognizing certainly that it's been, an equal amount shared by the two entities in the JPA, but if in fact they have that money that could go forward, but yet they come to RT, when we went through this exercise, to Mr. Chenier's point a moment ago, we're not revisiting the $25 million the commitment was made by this board, but they're asking for an advance. Some of us spoke to this issue of a reimbursement agreement. Now talk about timing and what that means to that, but could you elaborate on what West Sacramento has available to them?
So the city of West Sacramento committed $35 million to the construction budget. They've allocated an equal amount as the city of Sacramento's amount, which was $9 million apiece, which leaves $26 million left that they could commit to the project. I'm based on the discussion that I've heard. I believe that the city of Sacramento, frankly, is all in. The city of West Sacramento is limiting their exposure should the project not proceed, and are looking at the Prop 1A money as a way to continue and progress the project through the construction bid, so we get some actual pricing, and the SSGA to keep the project moving without increasing their exposure should the project not proceed. I think that's the thinking. That's why a reimbursement agreement, I think Director Chenier's correct, would be difficult if that reimbursement agreement was just to repay RT for the $3.5 million of Prop 1A monies committed. I think it's a different discussion if it's reimbursing RT if the money isn't eligible for expenditure. I think those are two very different things.
Thank you for that. I just would comment that if we're talking about limiting exposure, then I'm certainly going to look at RT's exposure on this as well. And obviously, that's what you brought to us from a staff perspective. Thanks.
Vice Chair Hansen.
Thank you. Sometimes when you go first, you learn things you should have brought up from the other members. First of all, I know I talked about the value of this, the agreements made with the city to regional transit. And while we're not taking a vote tonight, I think it'd be very hard for me to have helped negotiate those benefits to regional transit, which number in the millions, and then have this board then ask the city or potentially the cities to reimburse it for this money when the value of those agreements is far in excess of what is being talked about. So I respect that got brought up, but I would not support that in the end. I don't, though, have a problem with our staff and the JPA staff working with the city of West Sacramento to see if this board is not able to provide the additional resources for whatever reason, or maybe the CTC intervenes and doesn't support it for pre-development costs, that if they're willing to front that money, if that's an option, I think we should know that, Director Natoli.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
One last comment.
Yes.
Okay. Just as an aside, I got to spend some time in Portland last week and spent a fair amount of time riding their streetcars. And very crowded, really worthwhile, and I think an economic boost to the area that I certainly was in. So got me more excited about what we're doing here.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Lonergan, Mr. Lee, did you get what you needed from us to be prepared for September 24th?
I think so.
I'll take that as a resounding yes.
If the boss is happy, I'm good.
All right, then. Next item.
Item number 9, the general manager's report.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board, and the public. If you notice our item 9, C, internal auditor's work plan. We have an item here. Before we have our internal auditor, Mr. Matt Pinkerton over there. Before I bring him to the podium, I just want to give a little bit of background information so public would understand why he's here to present the preliminary auditing work plan. So last month, SAC-RT board accepted or approved dual reporting structure for a few specific positions to report to board and GM CEO to encourage the transparency and the free flow of the information. As a result of this new reporting structure, 3 positions will have direct access to board and will be able to directly communicate from and to board while reporting to the GM CEO or his or her designees for daily supervision. The reporting structure will expand, strengthen, and clarify the oversight responsibility of SACRT's board over district's policy direction and strategic plan. Establish a performance culture of accountability and teamwork, and certainly foster transparency and timely information sharing with the policy makers. The 3 positions are internal auditor, legal counsel / director of legal service, and equal employment opportunity administrator. Tonight, I would like to ask SACRT's internal auditor to make a presentation to the board summarizing his current internal auditing activities and seek input from the board on his preliminary annual work plan. His position is responsible for conducting various audits and a review of performance, effectiveness, and efficiency, as well as watch for any potential signs of fraud, waste, and abuse across the district. So Matt, the podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Henry.
Thank you, and welcome, and we're all appreciative of how important your work is, and we love brevity.
Understood. Okay, Matt Pinkerton, Internal Auditor. Since this is the first time I'm addressing you, I just want to start by sharing the adopted objective of internal audits, and that is to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of SACRT through an independent assessment and evaluation of operations, activities, internal controls, compliance, opportunities, and risks. With that objective in mind, this brief presentation is to report on current and future projects, as well as solicit input from the board on the 2019 internal audit plan. Okay, every 3 years, the FDA does a comprehensive on-site review. They group federal laws, regulations, and award requirements into 20 areas. We had findings in 3 of those areas. We have, or shortly will, submit corrective action for all of them. And once that is accepted or demonstrated to be implemented, those findings will be closed. So just briefly, my current projects are, as I mentioned, assisting with closing all trainer review findings. I'm also working on addressing other issues that were highlighted during the trainer review, including our subrecipient monitoring plan. We have 11 subrecipients, as well as updating our disadvantaged business enterprises program. At the bottom there, I'm also working on updating all SOPs for the district. Okay, looking ahead, my plan is to transition from compliance issues described in those previous slides to audit matters. And the first step listed here is to finalize the 2019 audit plan. Tonight, I'm just going to briefly go over the methodology for developing that plan and give you all an opportunity to provide any input, thoughts, feedback. So the plan is based on 2 components. One, an ongoing risk assessment of the district, and 2, as I mentioned, input from management as well as the board. The risk assessment is based on a number of categories with roughly equal weight: financial and compliance risk, security and safety risk, operational and strategic risk, images and reputation risk, the complexity of activity, and the time since the last audit. Some examples Could be looking at project management, contract management, or looking at IT resources and IT risk of cyber attack. And a last one could be a review of the language assistance program. Okay, as I mentioned, the other source for the audit plan is input from the board, and that could be any concern really, compliance, fraud, customer service, safety, security, fiscal responsibility, or business efficiency. The goal is really to really balance that risk management with management and board concerns so that any selected audit is of high value to the agency. And just to run through these last ones because they supplement the audit plan, in order to address the risk of waste, fraud, and abuse, as well as to strengthen RT's internal control framework, I propose establishing a waste, fraud, and abuse hotline, as well as a full review of all of RT's internal performance metrics. And just as a footnote, I'm also going to help prepare for the state TDA triennial performance review. That's it. I'm happy to take any questions or receive any input you have on the audit plan.
Great, and Mr. Chenier did not have to raise his hand. I knew he would be chiming in.
No, this is very quick. So I think this is great. I appreciate it. And Henry, thank you for gearing this up. I just want to say at the city, we've got a hotline as well. One of the things that we really did not fully anticipate was the use of the hotline and the resources needed to answer those pieces. So just want to make sure if we're going to go forward that we have the capacity to answer complaints with the hotline.
Thank you. I reviewed the cities, and I believe it takes about a third of the resources just to address the hotline.
From the auditor's office, yeah.
That's right, yeah.
It's
That's
been significantly
substantial.
more than we had thought it would be.
Right.
I think that there is a payoff. Enough is true that comes through that it makes it worthwhile, but it's still a significant amount of resources. So it's just something you'll have to think about in your budget for next year.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, let me just say that the work that you are taking on is incredibly important to the organization, so might I suggest with Henry's agreement that you reach out to individual board members and have a deeper dialogue than is available at a meeting like this.
Understood. That'd be great.
Great,
Thank you.
Is that your report? Oh, okay. Madam Clerk? I do, thank you very much. That's why you're here. And we have reset the calendar for the clock for 3 minutes. Mr. Mike Barnbaum.
Thank you. Yes, my portion of the GM report was focusing on the meeting calendar. There are some upcoming meetings just to take note of, and I'll make sure I'll get them to staff also at the end of the meeting. Tomorrow at 4:30 at the Smythe Academy off of Dos Rios Street and Richards Boulevard is a charrette to help design and help look for a new Dos Rios station. So again, that'll start at 4:30. Then next week on Monday the 17th is the Paratransit Board meeting. That starts at 6 p.m. at Florin Road and Woodbine in South Sacramento. On the 18th is the Roseville Transportation Commission. That's at 7 p.m. 311 Vernon Street in Roseville. On the 18th, the 19th, so Wednesday at 10 a.m. in the Sacramento City Hall Council chambers will be the meeting of the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Board of Directors. Then the following week, your board meeting is the 24th. The Folsom City Council meeting is on the 25th at 6:30. And on the 27th is stakeholder meeting number 2 to help move SAC-RT forward with the design of the route optimization study. We hope that every stakeholder who received an email for that meeting on the 27th is present. That's
I'm
it.
sorry, back up again. The SAC True meeting is going to be talking about.
No,
right
this
up-
is not the SAC True meeting.
Okay.
So this is the meeting. Yeah, hold the clock for a minute. There was a meeting several months ago. And it was called Stakeholder Meeting Number 1.
Keep the clock going.
The folks that run that meeting are Jarrett Walker and Associates out of Oregon.
Right.
Okay, so his staff come down to Sacramento.
Okay.
This is Stakeholder Meeting Number 2.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And they had previewed it was going to happen sometime in the fall. It just so happens that's as pretty early fall as you can get, September 27th, right here in this room at 5:30. Okay.
Thank you.
Then, in closing, the last 2 meetings, on the 28th at 9:30 in the morning, in the Merced Board of Supervisors chambers will be the San Joaquin JPA board meeting. And on the 29th at 10 a.m., yes, it's a Saturday, Rail Pack will be hosting their Steel Wheels Conference, among other things, talking about Prop 6 and hopefully No on 6. And Jim Allison of the Capitol Corridor JPA and Dan Levitt of the SJ JPA will be making presentations. We hope you don't miss that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Jeffrey Tartagia.
Well, board members, I tried to find out from Henry, but to my knowledge, as of last week, item number 9 was AB 709, which was something that 2 years ago was brought forward, and August 31st, it supposedly went through the legislators, but it missed key components. So I'll invite you guys to find out what AB 709, that was specifically related to regional transit, that what it is about. But since I haven't heard, I guess I should write a constituent letter saying that since it wasn't get everything, maybe it should be held up. Last year with Kevin McCarthy, I had that discussion. Now this year, who Kevin McCarthy is or McCarty, whatever our local guy is.
There we go.
I have that problem with the damn last name.
Guy from Bakersfield really doesn't care what you have to say about Trump.
Bakersfield was interesting. I was there at the Sheridan when he had his little protest conversation. But anyway, I'm guessing I will write a constituent letter to our little governor about with the number of things. They've got 3 or 4 that are going right now this week.
All right, thank you, Jeffrey. There's no other cards I have from the public. Is there any other comments or questions from the board? We're adjourned.